Aramaic.
Oh, and we're live. Yes, we do chit chat before the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Legal Lunch and Learn, a weekly live show where we ask an expert your questions on a legal topic. My name is Cindy. I am the staff attorney here at Maryland Legal Aid. The co-host of my show is Mario Shtinia, also staff attorney here at Maryland Legal Aid. Hi, Mario.
Hey, Cindy.
And a brief shout out to Alex Chase, our production engineer, who is working in the background to making sure everything's running smoothly. So as usual, if you do have an immediate legal issue, make sure you're contacting us. Our email here is lawyer@mdlab.org, LAWYER@mdlab.org. Our phone number here is 443-451-2805. And of course, as per usual, just because you take some legal advice from us, it does not establish an attorney-client relationship between any of the attorneys you see here today and you or with Maryland Legal Aid. So if you do have a question or a issue you want to talk to a lawyer one-on-one about, make sure that you're reaching out. And of course, this video will also be uploaded to YouTube afterwards for those who need captions. So let's just go ahead and dive into our topic today, which is PBJs, probation before judgment, and good cause hearings. So, Mary, let's define what exactly is a PBJ and when is it eligible for expungement?
Definitely. So probation before judgment is typically found when you would plead guilty, and in lieu of having it say guilty on your record, you get probation. And that probation, if you complete it successfully, it will remain a PBJ, probation, and eventually it is eligible for expungement. So it's not a conviction, it's a probation before judgment. And in those cases, you have to wait 3 years from either the disposition date, so that's going to be the day the court entered the PBJ on the record, or the end of their probation, whichever is longer. And this trips a lot of people up, and it's some math. But basically, if your probation before judgment is less than 3 years, it's just a 3 years from the disposition date. If you have a probation before judgment that's longer than 3 years, you have to wait for it to be over. So you don't see a lot of those. They're usually less, I've seen them as short as a day, but I have seen one up to 5 years. So at that point, obviously, you can't get it expunged after 3 years if you're still on probation. But typically, it's going to be 3 years from that disposition date.
Right. So that brings up a really good point. So there's a lot of problems when it comes to PBJs and expungements. Like if it's like a null process or acquittal, or dismiss, sometimes we see that too. It's really obvious, like if it's eligible or if it's not eligible for expungement. But for some reason, when it's a PBJ, it trips everybody up. So let's go in a little bit more detail about the counting. And so for those who might have already filed one and got it denied, you might want to redo the math just to make sure that maybe you should file again. So let's say if I have a probation that was a year, right? How long do I have to wait before I can file?
You've got to wait those 3 years.
Yep.
From
3
the
year
date it was
minimum.
entered.
Yep.
Mhm.
And can I have any convictions in the meantime, like while I'm
No.
waiting? Yeah.
So this is one of the big things with probation before judgments, and it's different than all of those other ones like null process and stats and acquittals, is that you cannot have a conviction for another charge in that 3-year waiting period. If it's after your waiting period's over, so either your probation's completed or the 3 years, whichever is longer, you cannot have a subsequent conviction in that time period. And if you do, that PBJ is stuck on your record unless that subsequent conviction becomes eligible for expungement, and that's a whole much longer waiting period.
Yep. Well, let's talk about so when we do file for expungement sometimes, and sometimes I feel this is a common problem that we do run into. Someone gets a PBJ and then within the 3 years they get another PBJ. Do we think it's eligible for expungement if it's another PBJ?
Yes.
Yes.
100% yes.
We do. I think yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, I think the law is pretty clear on that one. It said within the 3 years, you cannot have another conviction. And the PBJ, hands down, it's not a conviction.
Exactly. And so sometimes you'll get an objection from the state and they'll try to argue that your second PBJ counts as a conviction, locking in your first one, but that's not true. And that it gets confusing for other people. It's, I don't think it's on purpose that they're trying to hold you up. They're confused. So in that case, that's when you would have a hearing set in, and we've argued those and always won, always been successful in having the first PBJ expunged as long as it's eligible otherwise.
Right. And I feel it also brings a good point that like show up to your hearings. Like if even you don't have us representing you and you're representing yourself, I mean you do you, but still show up to your hearing. Even if you kind of don't really care about your PBJ anymore, like show up to your hearing because you might actually be eligible and and you have to stand up for yourself on that one. Same with, obviously I know a lot of attorneys do watch the show too. Stick to your guns because I feel it is a little confusing the way the law is worded sometimes, and I think over the years has become more and more clear. If that
Yeah.
if that makes sense, yeah.
Definitely. And also say, we don't do this all the time, but if you filed on your own and you get an objection and a hearing set in and you really don't know what to do and you think that it is eligible, you can call us and we can help you look at it. And sometimes we even enter our appearance and could represent you at the hearing, if that makes sense. So if you have a hearing and you're worried about it, always just contact us because we could at least go through it with you.
Yep, absolutely. So another issue with PBJs, I think this is also quite common, and different jurisdictions definitely do it a little differently. It's the marijuana PBJ. So recently, there's been I say recently, but I think it's 2018. I don't think it's that recent.
It's been a few years.
It's been a few years that possession of marijuana is, even if you get a guilty on it, it's eligible for expungement in 4 years, and even if you get a guilty on it and you have a subsequent conviction, it is still eligible for expungement. And PBJ is messing people up on this one a lot because if say have a possession in for marijuana, you get PBJ on it, which is great, and then you get another conviction for something else or for the same thing, it doesn't matter. So you get another conviction within the 3-year waiting period. So under the PBJ rules, that case wouldn't be eligible for conviction, except that doesn't make any sense because if it is possession of marijuana, even if it is conviction in that case, it would still be eligible for expungement in 4 years. So we've had I can't remember which jurisdictions because we practice statewide, but I don't think I had any case where I go in front of the judge and explain, judge, I think the intent of the legislature is for marijuana charges to be able to come off. Have you had that issue? Because we do go to court for it all the time.
Yeah, I have. And I think it's very confusing. It's confusing to the judges too, because, they want to follow the letter of the law most of the time, and what makes sense. And what happened in this case is that when they put this provision that possession of marijuana convictions were eligible for expungement for a variety of reasons, because it's decriminalized in certain amounts and also with medical marijuana, they've decided to, make these easier to come off your record. You don't need to wait as long. But when they wrote that, which with great intent, they forgot to think about what happens when you have a probation before judgment for that. And so a probation before judgment is always seen as less severe than having a conviction. And so it doesn't make any sense that your conviction can come off your record, but your probation before judgment can't. I actually have only had a hearing on this once, and unfortunately we were unsuccessful. Because of the black letter of the law, the judge went with that, and then we unfortunately weren't unable to appeal for a variety of reasons unrelated to the substance of the case. But I've actually also had it many times where it just goes through and the judges expunge it without an objection, because depending on the state's attorney or the judge, they understand that this doesn't make any sense logically. Why can your conviction come off, but your probation before judgment can't? But
Right.
it's very frustrating and confusing.
Yeah, I think it's also very it also varies first from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and it varies from judges to judges. Some judges, and it won't even call for a hearing, even if there's an objection, and they look at it and they just rule on the objection and rule on the petition right there. And some judges will call for a hearing and listen to both sides and decide one way or the other. And it's one of those, again, if you do have a hearing notice, please go to your hearing. If you want our help and just to make sure that, okay, this is why this is going to be denied, or this is why these are the documents I need to bring to court in order to get this expunged, give us a call. Like even if we didn't initially file it, you have a question, you can still contact us about it.
Yeah,
So
definitely reiterate to go, because sometimes what'll happen is the judge will look at it and they might realize that it is eligible, but if you're not there, many times they won't even open the case file. They'll just say, didn't appear, and won't look at it. So if you're physically there, even if you're not quite sure or you're nervous about it, they'll look at it for you and apply the law to the best of their ability. And the worst thing that can happen is they say no at the hearing. Nothing else
yep.
is going to happen. That's the worst thing that can happen. And expungement hearings it's not like a trial where you have to go to the witness box and there's rules of evidence and all that stuff. They're usually pretty informal. They're not super stressful. So I encourage you just to go, or, obviously call us as well.
Yeah. So speaking of hearings, let's talk about good cause hearing. And this is a very specific kind. So this is not a normal expungement hearing where there has been an objection and the state's like, no, this is what we disagree on. A good cause hearing, it's for most often a PBJ, sometimes a stat, where your 3 years of however many years of waiting period hasn't come up yet, but you have like really good reasons why it should be expunged early. So let's talk about what kind of cases, Mario, do you think are good cases for good cause hearings?
Definitely. Yeah. So when we're talking about good cause, it's because, like when we talked about last time, things like null process, acquittals, not guilties have a 3-year waiting period, but you can waive it. But then stats and probation before judgment have a 3-year waiting period that you cannot waive. You have to wait the full time. But sometimes waiting is causing hardship for you and it's just too long. So there's a bunch of different factors, but basically you file for expungement, or you can file a motion saying that, I have good cause. It's written into the statute that if you have good cause, that it may or may not be allowed to be taken off early. And typically a good cause that we would take, or that I would encourage someone to try if it's really holding up your life, is if, you've never had, it's the only thing on your record, it's your first charge, your first PBJ, your first stat, typically nonviolent crimes. So a kind of a less severe crime, but I'm not saying to not do one if it's an assault or something, but you also want to look at, how long it's been. So if you just got off probation last month, maybe that's not going to be they want you to wait some period of time, basically. And then there's all these other factors that go into it to make your case why you think this should come off your record early, that you would make in front of the judge.
Yeah. And in terms of good cause, how your record negatively impacting you is not necessarily a good cause. I mean, it is a good cause to you, but it is not necessarily a good cause to the court. I'll give you an example. I won't name names. But I once watched in a good cause hearing where the defendant or petitioner was granted a PBJ on a theft charge, and it was a pretty serious theft charge. And I think the deal was that if he will pay back whatever money he owed, he can be done with the probation as long as he pays back within like a month or something like that. So as soon as he paid that back, the lawyer comes up and asks the judge for a good cause hearing and asks for that to be expunged. And the reason that they gave was that this man is going to be running for a political office and it would negatively impact his political career. And let me tell you, that's that's not gonna fly. So when we say good cause, we're, and if your record is holding you back somehow, and this would really help, we're talking more about if you've been offered a job or a promotion and you literally have a letter from your employer, for example, and I've seen this, where your employer said, well, we do want to hire you, but you have this one thing on your record, and if you can get that expunged, then, or you can somehow clear your record on that one, then we'll give you the promotion or we'll give you this job. And obviously, the time also matters. So like a month into your sentence and you're asking for that to be expunged, when the minimal time you gotta waste 3 years is not very compelling. But if you're about a couple of weeks from this being done and would just make sense for this to come off your record a little bit early, then that's much more compelling. I think a lot of times I do have a lot of people requesting good cause hearings, and they have barely um they had barely waited for a year. And I don't know about you, Mary, maybe you have a different opinion, but I feel like at least at least go over the halfway point.
No, and I would agree because for one, a lot of times they're not going to grant these because it's an exception to the law and it has to be a very compelling case. For one, it's going to depend on your judge. So you could have the world's most compelling case that you think and your lawyer thinks too, but the judge might disagree. But yeah, I would say that the closer you are to it actually being eligible, the more likely it's going to be. You want to have documentation. So I had a client who was like, I've applied to 20 jobs and 10 of them I have in writing that they would have hired me if I didn't have this on my record. And I have 2 kids and I volunteer at their school and I have nothing else on my record and nothing's happened since. And, having this come off my record 6 months early would make a huge impact on my life and would help my family and my community and all of those things. Um, and, they may or may not grant it, but you want to come up with all the reasons why it's holding you back, any type of documentation to show that, and to really show that you haven't had any run-ins with the law since that original PBJ, because that's part of what they want to see as well. That's part of that why they have that subsequent conviction rule. They want to show that haven't gotten into any trouble in this waiting period. So if you can kind of demonstrate that, you have a stronger case. But again, it depends on the judge. It depends on the day, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually reminds me a lot in my back in my criminal defense days. This is a lot like a bond hearing where you had to talk about the social aspect, and your criminal history is examined, your subsequent conviction, if any, is examined, how long you spend with PBJ on your record, or how long you spend in custody is examined. And at the end of the day, there's no and for those lawyers who are listening, there's no list of factors, unfortunately. I wish the legislature would give us a little more guidance, but I think sometimes it's also good to be a little ambiguous so that you can bring in factors that a legislator might not be able to consider. So I think at the end of the day, if you think you have a good cause, maybe talk to a lawyer, talk to one of us, and eh, it doesn't hurt to try, honestly. But sometimes we can tell you from like a mile away, ooh, this is not gonna go. So you don't waste your time, and it might be better for you to just wait.
So, and I've had that with clients where, it's about 6 months left on it. And, it looks, for one, you never know. You could have a great case and it's going to get denied either way. But, it looks kind of iffy if it would be potentially a good case. And the client and I discussed it, and the anxiety, the stress of having to go to a hearing and do all of this wasn't worth it to her. And eventually she ended up getting a job and it didn't even really matter anymore, and it worked out. But that's something to take into account too, is this isn't like a typical expungement where you file the paperwork and as long as nothing goes wrong, you get an order in the mail and you don't have to go to court. This does require a hearing where you need to show the documentation. You need to have a well-reasoned argument why, and it can be stressful. So it kind of depends how much it's affecting your life, how much you really need it, and kind of where your emotional energy is at the moment on it too, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. So usually this is the part where we segue into our audience questions, but I actually don't see any. And that's understandable. I think good cause hearing and PBJs is one of the most confusing things if you're doing expungement. So I think the only thing I can really tell our audience is if you don't know, come talk to us one-on-one.
Always.
Everyone's, especially for expungement, I think everyone's case is kind of different. what works for your neighbor might not work for you. Probably doesn't actually work for you actually, because everyone's record is different. So and our service is free for those who qualify for our services. So come talk to us. With that said, do you have any closing remarks, Mario? Or I'll just do my usual. If you like today's video, make sure you like and like our Facebook page so you know when we go live again. And of course, next week we are still going to be talking about expungements. That's going to be session 3 out of 4. So next week we're going to talk about things that go wrong. And lots of things can go wrong when it comes to expungements. And
It might be a long one.
it might be a longer one. Today's
little
shorter, which is great because your time is important, and I don't know if we're all that smart. We're experienced, but I don't know if we're the smartest people in the room. But next week, we have a lot for you for things that go wrong. So make sure you tune in next week. With that said, thank you for tuning in, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.